We're all familiar with different conceptions of the state, from absolutist to democratic and liberal, but today we're going to get acquainted with a much more original and reactionary view of the state. Julius Evola, via his traditional method, conceived of a paradigm in which there are true states and false states according to higher laws. This is much different from the pluralistic view common today, in which there is simply a plurality of choices of state available. Here there is instead a true position and a false position. A true state more closely matches the eternal metaphysical laws of the universe, while a false state either neglects or inverts them. A true state respects the law of hierarchy, in which the most excellent and noble people are entrusted with the right to rule and command, while those below them are required to obey. True states respect the law of differentiation, meaning that the state classifies people according to their natures, such as peasant and merchant, or priest and warrior. The caste system is effectively a system of differentiation. True states also have a center. They are comprised of units that orbit around a principle, such as a religious tradition. Justice is also an important component of the true state, which he defines as accordance with divine laws rather than what we might be familiar with today, i.e., justice merely as a consistently applied legal standard. A just ruler is one that has the mandate of heaven, a leader who respects the traditional laws upon which society is based. True states are based on personality. Personality is the mediated principle of human autonomy and action, in contrast to faceless collectivism. Being neither individualist nor collectivist, a true state is founded on the dignity and honor of individual persons acting in unison toward a common idea. Sovereignty in a true state is necessarily also personal, and therefore entrusted to a single person who carries out the duties of his position. Finally, a true state respects liberty, not negative liberty, but rather the traditional definition of liberty, such as we might find in Plato, that comes from adhering to the good. Modern states, according to Evola, are false states. Under democracy, fascism, and even National Socialism, the principle of hierarchy is inverted. Fascist, National Socialist, and Communist states are based around the primacy of the needs and the rights of the worker. In democracies, the state follows the whim of individuals, who are presumed to be sovereign. Sovereignty is founded on the masses, such as the electorate, workers' soviets, or in the case of fascism, the general will of the people as discerned by a dictator. Instead of differentiation, most of these states have a form of collectivism in which the people are viewed as a mass without traits or qualities, capable of being disposed to do whatever the state needs at a given time. They are lumped together without class and without respect to their worth. In contrast to a traditional state, modern states are without a center. They are secular, based on nothing more than economic laws and positive legalisms. They evolve dialectically depending on the political context, and never have the capability of returning to a previous form. Where the traditional state has its basis in certain truths, a modern state is based only on conventions, and thus there is no consistent basis by which the state can judge itself or course correct. Being baseless, they often contain contradictions. For example, the Soviet workers' state ruled by the iron fist of an absolute dictator, or a police state of liberty, which is dominated by capitalist coercion and interests. Justice in modern states similarly has no consistent, higher standard by which we can judge the state's laws and actions. As a result, modern states constantly violate what we conceive of as the rights of the people without any recourse possible. According to the principle of popular sovereignty, there's no right that the people can violate, so justice is essentially whatever the state does. In such a situation, it's possible for an apparatus, such as the deep state, to meddle in politics without damaging the legitimate In such a situation, it's possible for an apparatus such as the deep state to meddle in politics without damaging the legitimacy of the state. Traditional states always had the mandate of heaven, and a ruler's action would be judged according to the religion by which his authority is consecrated, and thus deposed if he is found in violation. In modern states, the Constitution is supposed to serve this role. However, being a man-made document ungrounded in orthodoxy, it is constantly changed and reinterpreted depending on the situation, and so it proves to be insufficient as a safeguard against injustices. A document of positive law follows the myth of the rule of law, the myth that a document made by men can ever supersede human action in matters of politics. Modern states also fail to respect the personality, resulting in a general alienating effect. Democratic liberal states reduce everyone down to an individual, and as Evola has written, an individual is not the same as a person. A person has traits, qualities, emotions, and is capable of action. An individual is that which only has number as a quality, and so individualism is essentially an empty value, which is the only reason why individuals can be equal. An individual is without honor, without dignity, and without differentiation. He's just a unit. On this question, Evola repudiates both de jure and literal individualism. De jure individualism, which assumes that all men are equal in rank, is false on the basis of the identity of indiscernibles. If all people are equal in rank, then there's only one person, which is false. Literal individualism is false because men are self-evidently not created equal. In collectivist states, the problem is even worse because dignity and action are only considered on a collective basis. The needs of a priest and a farmer are quite different, and the way they conduct their lives is also different. However, a collectivist state makes the same demands of them, even to the point of eradicating certain classes. For example, the maxim of "he who does not work will not eat" applies to those who ought to have spiritual authority, who would otherwise best be served by having a certain ability of detachment from the economic concerns of daily life, and who might otherwise have made their living through donations. Everyone ends up collapsed into the category of producer and consumer without any respect for their differences. Personality is so disrespected that the right of property ownership is, in the case of communism, ultimately abolished, whereas there were always smallholders and proprietors in traditional societies. Finally, modern states lack much in liberty. The negative liberty characteristic of liberalism ends up causing a lot of harm by way of increases in decadence. People are free to harm themselves, to do drugs, to engage in adultery, and other behaviors that generally harm society. People are less free in such a situation because they are slaves to intoxication. The idea that freedom comes from conformity to the good is absent, since the notion of a transcendent good is also absent in secular individualist society. In the case of fascist or communist states, not only is it true that they lack the idea of a transcendent center, but liberty is abandoned altogether or redefined out of existence. Human autonomy is completely erased, the personality is squashed, and there are no longer any stations remaining for people to properly express their true natures. Totalitarianism is characteristic of modern states, whereas traditional states were largely incapable of it and tended to respect the distinction between public and private affairs. The other question is that of nationalism. The nation has always existed as an ethnic or racial entity, but nationalism, the idea of founding a state on the ethnic masses, is relatively new. Nationalism is a collectivistic idea and thus thoroughly anti-traditional, which is why Evola was against it in principle. He was not against the preservation of the nation. His intention was to find a basis for the state that did not invert the hierarchy principle, which is in effect what nationalism does. Some might doubt Evola's bona fides on race as a result of this position, but to those people, I should point out that Evola wrote an entire book on race called The Synthesis and Doctrine on Race, which he presented to Mussolini, where he goes even further than most racists do in arguing for racial purity, supposing that purity must apply even on the level of the spirit, so that a race's general character actually matches that of the race. For Evola, then, the state must be based on an aristocratic principle, but that aristocratic principle is also connected with the purity of the blood. Again, here he goes even further than modern racists in supposing that there is a certain racial purity or spiritual purity associated with race, which is lost in contact with other races. In this way, Evola positions himself not below, but above nationalism. He envisions pure, aristocratic states of a given race based on spiritual and biological purity, in which the principle of hierarchy, rather than simply just the Volk, is the basis of everything.